Welcome to week 3. Seeing lots of improvement in the discussion boards. Most of you are including references with your original post as well as your peer responses. Seeing a lot more engagement between the peers, and that's important. After all, if we were in a brick and mortar traditional school environment, we'd have a lot of that during the week, so we try to make up for that knowledge transfer online through a very robust and interactive discussion board. So thank you to those who have stepped up and engaged with their peers. One note, if you're not getting the grade that you want or that you expect in those discussion posts, make sure you review the guidance that I gave you. I've given you some pretty good tips on how to increase the number of points that you earn. Basically, if you meet the minimum requirements, your weekly post with 2 to 3 citations, your peer-to-peer post, 2 of those with 1 or 2 citations, you're gonna earn between 24 and 27 points because you met the requirements, and so you'll earn a passing grade. If you want to go above and beyond, which some of you have done, 2 ways to do that. Include more citations in each of your posts, both your original post as well as your peer responses, or just engage more with citations amongst your peers. So those are ways that you can get closer to that, more points if you want it. Otherwise, I think most of you are doing a very good job, and I enjoy seeing that conversation throughout the week, much like I enjoy seeing the conversation in a traditional classroom. Okay, so this week you're going to identify the client for your final project, and here's some advice that I'll give you. Don't just identify the client and move on. Take this opportunity to think about and to include in your submission ideas for how you're going to use our text, other reading, maybe some other initial research that you've done. How are you going to apply course-related principles to that final project? So I would encourage you to include a few citations in your proposal. That way I have the ability to help if I think you're off track or maybe steer you in a different direction. It'll also pay off for you. One, you'll be much further ahead in your research. And 2, you'll have a better understanding of how your topic and the information that we're learning this term, how those tie together. So a couple of pieces of advice as we start this week. 2 chapters in our primary text, chapters 4 and 5. In chapter 4, we get another peek into the Silver Anvil, the Public Relations Society, kind of the Emmy for, or Oscar, or whatever term you want to use for public relations. They go through the entry criteria, and there's some specific feedback that one of the judges offers. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Just know that when you deal with Silver Anvil, some of you may have submitted packages for that. I have in the past. They have 4 major areas: research, planning, execution, results. That may be a little bit different than what you're used to. Sometimes people who are in public relations know RPI, or research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. That RPI, it's the same thing, so don't get confused, just different words for essentially the same thing. One of the things I noted as I read the text this week relative to the Silver Anvil is the judge who talked about how many agencies fail to quantify their entry's contribution to each of the 4 areas. They noted that this was an area of improvement. So 2 things on that. One, it should sound familiar because we've been talking for 3 weeks now about the importance of research and data, numbers, those kinds of things that help for your public relation planning. And 2, it's consistent with what I've noticed in my own judging. I submitted a Silver Anvil years ago, back for Y2K, some planning we did out at U.S. Pacific Fleet. And then for the Navy, we have our own awards program, and I have served as a judge for that awards program. And that's typically what we see too. A lot of great work, but not a lot of good, solid measurement that's tied to the organizational goals. So keep that in mind. Of course, it's not about winning awards. It's about how we can apply that to our own public relations, and more specifically to this class, how we can apply that to the knowledge that we're learning. Okay, so moving on into our text, there's a question that they ask about, or a recommendation they ask using questions about why is this happening? And it's sometimes called the 5 whys. You may be familiar with that if you've taken any other strategic planning classes. But remember, we were talking before in a previous week about the problem solving and how important that was, your problem statement. This is kind of one way to get at that. You ask the why question 5 times. Why is this happening? You get a response. Why is that happening? You get a response. And then as you narrow that down, typically you can get to a more refined problem statement. Or the cause of the problem. And again, that's where you got to focus your effort. You get that right, everything else just kind of flows from that knowledge of the cause of the problem or problem statement. All right, moving on, the author talks about tracking media placements. In the old days, that was kind of our secret to success, right? We'd show a whole bunch of clips, and I'm old enough to remember before we had online, and we actually got clips that we actually cut out with scissors and taped them on a piece of paper and made copies of them and shared them around the command. And that was how we showed value. Well, we are well past that, right? But there's still a need to track media placements. We do it in my job. I currently serve with the Navy as the National Director for Media Outreach. And in that role, we certainly collect clips. We also gather impressions, and we have other metrics that we use to show how we support the mission. And more importantly, for me as the leader, I'm interested in making sure that what we do actually supports the mission, right? So anyway, tracking media placements is still important, but it's not the end-all, be-all. It's just some people refer to it as maybe a measure of performance, not necessarily a measure of effectiveness, and certainly not exhaustive in terms of return on investment or ROI. Okay, and then finally, your author talks about how it can appear that organizations can perform research and they just research endlessly. And so I like that the author puts this in there because you may have heard the term paralysis by analysis. In other words, you just spend so much time studying the problem. Eventually, you got to get to a point where you fix it, right? You do something. And a personal example that I'll share is just after 9/11, when we were sending sailors over to Afghanistan and then a year and a half later to Iraq to help out the Army. We set up a team of people to, help these sailors because they were going on what we call an individual augmentee. They were an individual augmentee or an IA. The big deal, or for us, is that we're used to deploying on ships or submarines or with aviation squadrons, right? We go as a crew. We were sending these folks individually to help support the Army. So there were some special needs, and we had studied the problem. There was a lot of research going on. And then finally, the Vice Admiral, who's a 3-star, he sent out an email to the entire team, and he said, stop the studies, stop the research, stop all the meeting and conference calls, get this fixed now. And that woke people up. And so it was a good lesson for me because, I'm a planner, I like to research. But clearly, we had studied and researched, and we knew we were not going to get, and this is the point the Admiral was making, is we were not going to understand the problem in its most finite details. We just needed to get it fixed. And then once we got it fixed, we took some action to fix it. Then we could learn from that and get it better, as we did. And so for years, we continue to send sailors to fight in Iraq and Afghanistan and other places that we don't talk about, using some of the systems that were set up with that initial research after 9/11. So it does happen in the real world. You've probably got similar stories that you can share from your experiences in public relations or other experiences that you have even outside public relations that you can apply for research. So that's it for this week. As always, stay ahead with your assignments, stay engaged in the discussion board, and most importantly, enjoy this time of learning.